Well, hello. Here we are again, episode 60. What is truth? And again, we're approaching it in a logarithmic fractal spiral. And the closer we get, the farther away we are, depending on whether you look in front of you or you look behind you. And so caught in the midst of these two spiral lemniscates exists a point of consciousness. And of course, that which we think of as that particular consciousness isn't really that consciousness. It's a mere reflection of that consciousness. And that were you to see your true ego that was received through the Logos, well, you'd think that you were in the presence of the Almighty. I mean, after all, your personal puny ego, my personal puny ego, is not capable of digesting food or keeping my heart beating or making me twitch when I get a mosquito bite. So something's going on there, that there's a deeper level of self. And that's kind of a key that forms the bridge between us and the divine spiritual beings. And Rudolf Steiner had given an indication that you could try to, when you first wake up in the morning, don't open your eyes. See if you can pull that off. This is your task between now and next week, if you choose to surmount this challenge. See if you can have the presence of mind to not open your eyes when you first wake up, even if you do have an alarm clock. Well, today here we are in episode 60 of What is Truth, here with the Reverend David William Parry, out of the city of London and merry old England. And I think before I get off into some of the ideas that have been crossing my mind, I'll see what's up with Reverend David. David, how are you?
Afternoon, John. Yeah, reasonably well. I went to a Portuguese cafe yesterday to meet a journo friend with my better half, and I found myself coughing ever since. If anything was auto suggestion, it's truly that. But you're made to feel guilty for actually leaving your home in merry old England at the minute. So yeah, apart from a cough which I can't shake off now, despite endless lemony drinks with honey, reasonably well. A friend of yours, I think, wants to ask me about the London Stone on this show in a minute. But yeah, bring it all on. Going well. I mean, been talking to lots of Pentecostals recently. I had to physically throw out a born-again Christian from our Nephilim conference last week. Why can't they just shut up? Pay respect to other people. So I had to, something I haven't done since my days in the Edinburgh Fringe many years ago, but I'm still capable, as I was showed last Saturday. So wondering where from here and how long we have to labor under Babylon before the days of grace return. Apart from that, happy to see you and really pleased to be back on the show.
Excellent. Well, we had a brief hiatus, and I think that's a good thing. In the midst of my hiatus and David's hiatus, David had his Nephilim conference that I guess was a smashing success, as they would say. And so that David was able to maintain a stiff upper lippity through the whole thing in spite of great travail and personal suffering. Well, yeah. As well, I don't want to say that. Let me think. Sometimes I have to self-censor because I I have a sense of humor that isn't always, well, let's just leave it at that. Anyways, it's good to see everybody here. And as I was saying in the interim, I posted some shows that I had done back in 2019 regarding certain, what you might call things of alchemical value, as far as quite recently discovered factors in human nutrition regarding Ormus and C60 and other things to that effect, and also something on what kind of things we can do to make our body more capable of being able to withstand the onslaught of all the electrical fields in which we're present. That's quite a challenge. And so you might dig around on my YouTube channel, and you could find these things. And also I did a interesting show with my friend Christopher Earl Strunk. We did a show talking about the formation of what's called vertical integration. That is a corporate undertaking whereby they subsume all levels of the process from production to manufacture to shipment to sales, and how that developed out of Antwerp and Amsterdam over in Benelux. So that's an interesting impulse, and you could lead that back is kind of a modern shadow image of the Lohengrin impulse. But I'll have to approach that later, because that would take this whole show to explain to you what I meant by that. But that's good. We have something to look forward to. But in this show here, I thought it'd be a good idea to try and come to some kind of understanding regarding the precession of the equinox. Because recently there was a podcast, like the one by Cliff High, who comes up with some remarkable stuff, even though he gets off in the weeds of abstract thinking quite a bit. It's too bad he doesn't study anthroposophy. But, not everybody's on that path, and that's fine. But nonetheless, he does come up with some remarkable things. But he keeps presenting the idea that we're now in the age of Aquarius, and that's pretty interesting thing to think. But and he ties it into, on December 22nd, 2020, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius. And it was very tight. It was like Saturn was 35 minutes into the sign, and Jupiter was 41 minutes. So both less than a minute into the sign. And I do concur with him saying that there are certain impulses that are tied into the age of Aquarius. But we're, according to the reckoning of spiritual science, we've got a ways to go. And the impulses of an age don't even manifest until quite far into the age. It's a gradual thing, gradualis, gradually. And but so that if we want to look at the precession of the equinox, and he gets into talking about some numbers that really, if you're getting into the esoteric viewpoint, if you want to understand the cosmos, you look at the human being. And if you want to understand the human being, you look at the cosmos. So that if we get into that way of thinking and say, well, first of all, what does that mean? In the Psalms 90:10, it says, "The days of our years are 80 years and 10, And if by reason of strength they be fourscore years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off, and we fly away. And so that's a good old King David giving us some insights. And since I just had my 70th birthday, that's 10. So I guess I'm living on borrowed time. I guess I'm officially a patriarch. But nonetheless, Cliff High got into, on his video, astrowoology. He makes reference to a Dr. Bhatt, a mathematician from India, who talks about the precession cycle being 33,360 years, and each age being 2,780. That's what Cliff likes to use, and that's fine. Use whatever you want. But in the esoteric stream, the what's called the Platonic Great Year is 25,920 years. Okay. And of course, you divide that into the 12 ages, there are 2,160 years. Now, if you take that 25,920 year cycle and divide it by the circle of 360 degrees, you get 72. And so that's real close to the 10. A score, by the way, is 20. So 3 score is 60 and 10 makes 70. And so if you look at this and you say, well, why is that a human number more so than the one that Dr. Bhatt had calculated based on astronomical alignments? Because remember, everything's moving out there. So what are you going to use for your point of reference? And so it's extremely complicated, especially in the fact that we're not going around the sun in the circle, but we're actually trailing behind in the wake of the sun that's going at tremendous speed. But in getting into this, so that we understand the significance of the esoteric macrocosm, microcosmic principles. The Platonic Great Year is reflected in the day of a human being, in that on average, we take 25,920 breaths in a day. And so that's because on average, a human being breathes like 18 times a minute. And so Rudolf Steiner says, we thus renew our life rhythmically 18 times a minute. Let us now see how often we do this in one day. In 1 hour, this would be equal to 18 times 60, 1080. In 24 hours, 1080 times 24 is 25,920. That is to say, 25,920 times. And elsewhere he says, but the possibility of human freedom lies in the very fact that a perfect harmony does not always exist. And so you see that what this is making reference to, he says, in that case, we would have to investigate what 25,920 days really are. For 25,920 of these breaths in which the etheric rises and falls would have to correspond in their rise and fall to a reproduction of the Platonic year. Just as one day corresponds to 25,920 breaths, so the 25,920 days should also correspond to something in human lives. How many years are 25,920 days? Let us see. Let's take the year with an average of 365 1/4 days. Let's make a division, and then we shall obtain, as a result of the division, which is 365.25 divided into 25,920, it's about 71, okay? I mean, you can work out the fraction on that, but it's very close to 71. And he further says, that is to say about 71 years, which is the average duration of human life. Of course, the human being has his freedom and frequently he may grow older, but you know that the patriarchal age is indicated as 70 years. Thus, you have the duration of human life equal to 25,920 days, 25,920 of such great breaths. Once more, we obtain a cycle which reproduces microcosmically, in a wonderful way, the macrocosmic happenings. Thus, we may say, if we live one day, we reproduce the Platonic world year with our 25,920 respirations. If we live 71 years, we again reproduce the Platonic year with 25,920 great breaths, with the rising and falling pertaining to our waking up and our falling asleep. So what he's saying is that there's this layering of these, what are called in occultism, canon number, the canon of proportion, and that there's these archetypal numbers that represent the cosmos. But the archetypal numbers are derived from the human experience, not from the cosmos. And that's where people like Cliff Eye and other people have a stumbling block. They say, oh, they're using 25,920, and I look through my telescope, and and they have all their different versions, and there's quite a few different renditions of what they think it's supposed to be. And I'm not questioning that they didn't have those calculations, but I'm questioning that the occult value of the number is the microcosmic number. That's how you understand the cosmos. And so, that being said, and at another time I'll get into the actual ages themselves, because it would take us too far afield. So there, did that help you understand some things there, Reverend David?
Firstly, you can say whatever you want to me. You've become a good friend, and there aren't enough gags in the world, so it's always interesting to hear a new slant on things, particularly if there's comedy involved. I confess numerology leaves me utterly cold. Yada 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 and yada yada yada, and that equals yada 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 and yada yada yada. It's all very interesting, and I've been to many lectures at various times and places. I think there's an irony there, of people going through these wonderful explications with gorgeous star maps and things pointing at other things, but it's never ever floated my boat. I in the age of Kali, if that's what we're in, all sorts of new numbers kick into form. Like, isn't it, somebody told me once, the human lifespan actually goes down, and we all live, an old man or an old woman is actually 25. What a depressing thought. And I've heard Hindus squabbling about whether it's all Platonic or not. What did I take from those discussions? The opportunities for an individual seeker go off the scale in Kali Yuga. For society generally, it goes down in a depressing way, but it goes massively up for an individual seeker. Oh, that interests me much more than the general. I'm trying to think, when the moon is in the 7th hour and Jupiter aligns with Mars, are we in Aquarius or not? Oh God, if I had a pound coin for every argument at a drinks do I've heard between astrologers about whether we're in Aquarius or not, I would now be a rich man. I don't know. And again, I suppose it comes back to the fact I'm interested in the individual seeker at any time. I know general movements and constructs and categories. I mean, even categories of things need to upgrade and generalities need to upgrade, but that's not really where I'm coming from. I mean, is it the dawning of the age of Aquarius? I don't know. I wish it would bloody get on if it really is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. It seems like it's stopping and starting and stopping and starting. Just get into gear. Let's all get on with it. The only thing I can say that did catch my attention from these discussions, apart from when it came to its application in sacred geometry, because then, of course, we're looking at dreamscapes, like the old medieval cathedrals, which, of course, are textbooks in Europe for divine proportion. I mean, they are absolutely stunningly beautiful, and at the same time meant to represent cosmic harmony that can be achieved for the worshippers inside the buildings. I remember going to Notre Dame many years ago, before, of course, the recent disaster. Thank heavens I went there. And everything had this sort of strange atmospheric resonance to it, and a devastatingly beautiful building, a devastatingly wonderful experience. As I say, the one thing that caught my attention as opposed to that was from Arabic sorcery, where all demons are fractions, but all angels are prime numbers. And I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because that links in with the grimoire tradition. Of course, a lot of it's Arabic. People forget that. It's not simply Kabbalah. It's not simply of Jewish extraction, although I'm not going to argue the point. Yes, of course, the vast majority of it, as it came into Europe, is from a Jewish source or sources. But to say there's no Muslim or Arabic influence, at least in the European context, is very unwise, because there are subtle forces, subtle streams of calculation, I think that's a pun, at work. And the fact that fractions were always seen as struggling to realize themselves into whole numbers, that caught me as something of immense psychological importance, though I confess I've never actually followed it, apart from the fact every now and again you hear interesting little ditties, like, Aleister Crowley. No, I'm not obsessed with Aleister Crowley, but he did say something interesting in this regard too. He was thinking about demonic energies being partially formed and not complete, when he said something along the lines of, what was it, a demon with unity would be a god. What a strange, interesting, pregnant and unsettling thought, because he must get that type of reasoning from the realms of Arabic sorcery. In his case, I can make room for some of what he's doing, because you're dealing with an artistic personality, putting all of this stuff into action through some of the arts. I mean, certainly through I was going to say through detective writing. What was it? The Adventures of Simon If. Oh God, that's corny, but it might have worked. You never know. I mean, he actually did stage the whole Eleusinian Mysteries at Conway Hall, I believe. I'd love to have seen that. But yeah, all this stuff surfaces in him through that way, and that gains my attention a little. But I don't know. I go back to my days as a sort of a sixth form student, with some lecturer burbling something at the front, and me thinking, what's the time? Isn't it close to the break yet? Or, oh my, thank you, Professor, that was so interesting, as you rush out the door as fast as possible. I know it's all important. I know it's all wonderfully, and the fact that, of course, modern mathematics can map the world shows that we live in a rational order. I mean, it's demonstrating the fact, at the very least, that's the possibility of a rational order actually exists. Probably it demonstrates a lot more than that. But yeah, I confess that side of the tradition doesn't actually get me that excited. That's where I just look back and admire, and I nod. Hurrah! And I'm nodding again as I'm doing it. I nod and think that's wonderful. What do you think, John?
Well, let's see. How should I approach this? In looking at these things, and of course, every aspect of it is not for everybody, but for myself personally, I've taken up the challenge of trying to come to some understanding of the second mystery, which is the mystery of number. And of course, if you look at the scheme of evolution as presented in spiritual science, that is the scheme of the true Rosicrucian stream, you see that our present Earth was preceded by 3 stages. Rudolf Steiner calls them Old Saturn, Old Sun, and Old Moon. And he says that, and I'm going to paraphrase here because I didn't know I was going to be discussing this, but he says that, people find it unusual that they keep being confronted with this terminology and all this technical information regarding the stages of evolution and consciousness and all of that. And he says, this is the language of Christ. This is the language of the Logos. And if we wish to understand what we are, where we came from, and what our destiny is moving into the future, then through learning this language, you will have a vehicle to be able to assess where we are within evolution. And as far as your comments on Kali Yuga, Kali Yuga is an interesting point. According to Rudolf Steiner, Kali Yuga began 3,100 years before our era, okay, and ended in the year 1899. And so it's the ending of Kali Yuga, the lesser Kali Yuga, that is important thing to consider. And that, of course, the beginning of Kali Yuga ended with the according to Indian tradition, with the death of Krishna, right? And so you have that story in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna is explaining in the chariot, and he's explaining the concepts that are enshrined in the Bhagavad Gita. And after that, you have this whole tradition, and he's a Vishnuvite, okay? So he's a representative of Vishnu. But Rudolf Steiner also says he's also a representative of the mystery of Golgotha, the pre-Christian mysteries of Golgotha, as is Buddha, as is the mysteries of Osiris, as is the mysteries of Zarathustra, and that there's prophetic streams that all converge, the mysteries of Siegfried in the far north, the mysteries of Hu in Ireland, the Celtic mysteries. And so you can explore the work of Rudolf Steiner and come to a relationship to that there is a convergence that takes place. And the most complete convergence of all these mystery streams happened beginning in the 8th century, really, and moving up into the 9th century. Because in 769 AD, Charibert von Laun, who was the father of Bertha, who was that's the line from which Charlemagne descends from, right? So Charibert von Laun is a count. He's the grandfather of Charlemagne, and so you have this stream where he founds the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail, and in the 9th century, we have the events that are depicted in Wolfram von Eschenbach and other writers regarding Parsifal, and that Parsifal is an incarnation of a very, very significant individual. I mean, he's like Rudolf Steiner refers to him as even more profound than Zarathustra or Moses, and that he is actually essentially the incarnation of the being that's referred to as Manu. But yet he allowed himself to descend into the purely human way of manifesting, and then being able to come from that dullness, self-imposed dullness, because his mother didn't want him exposed to anything from the affairs of men, because her husband took off, went to war, and never came back. So she was going to shield him from that, keep him in the pristine nature. She told him about God, but he had no church doctrines and none of that, none of the baggage of culture. But yet he ends up becoming a Grail Knight. And Rudolf Steiner says this is a depiction of the real initiatory events of this individual that's called Parsifal. And Parsifal, in becoming the Grail King, we see in the Grail mysteries the conversions of the mysteries of the West from King Arthur, the mysteries of the North from Siegfried, the mysteries of the East from Persia and India, and the mysteries of the South from Egypt, that they all come together and are synthesized within the human realm, and that Parsifal is able to fully rise to an experience of the consciousness soul in advance of mankind. And this is like, way back in the 9th century. So it's a very interesting story. I didn't think that I was going to go in that direction, but that's okay. But in getting to understand this Kali Yuga experience that Rudolf Steiner says about Krishna, that he's of the Christ stream, but that Christ did not incarnate in Krishna. And that's an important thing to understand, that he was a part of that pre-Christian preparation for the mystery of Golgotha. And so he was overlighted by a great being that had never had an earthly incarnation, and in preparation for being able to come to fulfillment, to where the great being of the sun would use the vehicles that had been prepared for him and descend fully into the human experience. And Rudolf Steiner tells us that just before the crucifixion, he gets to the point to where he even loses touch with the many aspects of his cosmic being, and has the experience of purely human suffering. And that suffering, unnecessary, it's not karma of his own, but it's on our behalf. But it happens on a level of which it's incomprehensible. And so every time I think of it, I'm humbled, and I don't know what more I could say, but that the Grail impulse is meant to prepare something, because we're all Parsifals, whether we're male, female, whatever. We're all coming out of this doubt, this darkness of the realm of the shells. We all come out of this unredeemed realm. But that mystery of Mane is to be able to treat the darkness with kindness. And that's a mystery of the future. That's way beyond the ken of most people. And that's okay. But you'll see representatives of that stream in tremendous roles of sacrifice. They're in the middle of some broken down community in the third world, administering to souls selflessly. That's some of his students. So we could just bow in utter awe and respect of those striving souls. But getting back to this idea of being able to hold these things, and so it behooves us to be able to learn at least the magical number system, that Christ language.
You caught me that time. That's because we're in a hotel, and I'm speaking on my phone. We tried on the iPad, but we couldn't. I could basically only hear you mumbling, or my hearing's finally gone. So I'm actually using my phone at the moment and trying desperately to make sure I know what I'm doing before we get back on. I rather like matriarchs. Oh yeah, there's something you said about patriarchy. That's I think that does qualify you as a patriarch. That word is so misused nowadays. Lovey, it doesn't mean the rule of men. It means the rule of the fathers. Get your ideas right. It doesn't mean the rule of men. No one's ever said men rule anything. It means the rule of the fathers. Don't wish to be condescending, but learn the terminology properly. Now, The most neurotic woman I've come across from legend and lore was actually the mother of Wonder Woman when she was played by Phyllis Diller, one of my favourite American comedians. I confess, since old people talk about at the moment is Marvel and that particular universe, which is strangely folding into DC, or is it the other way round? So everybody's everything and everybody knows everyone and everyone seems to be related to everybody, which is a bit depressing. I'm sorry, let's have different stories with different lines of development. It's called interesting. But I must admit that did catch my attention years back, and it was just hilarious. Wonder Woman, I think played by that. I can never remember the name of the lady that did it recently. 70s, 80s. She was so statuesque, and she played Wonder Woman so brilliantly. And it used to completely again turn me off. Popular culture at its most trashy, mildly entertaining, but nobody's any the wiser for anything. Apart from this one extended episode, for some reason, Wonder Woman has to go back to the island of the Amazons, and Queen Hippolyta, the Queen of the Amazons, of course, is her mum, and it's just a neurotic woman that had her husband walk out on her 50 years previously, and she sat there saying, "Oh, Wonder Woman, men." And it just goes on like this, where she can't actually face the fact that her husband walked out. So that's that. Patriarchs, remember a sense of humour, please. I don't think the new James Bond should be a woman. I'm sorry. By the way, I've got loads of feminist credentials myself. It's just a gag, but there we are. Oh gosh, you said lots of curious things. I remember spending an evening many years back. I was going to say chanting a rationalist mantra, or rather a sort of scholarly mantra at somebody that couldn't work out whether Krishna was above Brahman. Of course, in Hindu theology, depending which school you belong to, because they have concepts comparable to what we mean by God, and some of the schools of theology are simply not talking about those things. The end. But if we're looking at the concept of Bhagavan, that is completely what we're talking about in the Abrahamic traditions. I mean, the concepts are exact. And of course, the Bhagavad Gita is something to do with Bhagavan, which of course only means the Gita recapitulated. It doesn't mean anything else. Certainly the relationship between, in a loose sense, in a theoretical sense, between the figure of a Krishna and the reality of a Christ, I mean, that very, very telling. In certain schools of Hindu theology, of course, Krishna cannot be above Brahman. Brahman is the ground of being. Brahman is the final point from which, the final reality. Everything surfaces from Brahman, everything sinks back into Brahman. Apart from this particular school, which says what I said that particular evening: Krishna is above Brahman, Krishna is above Brahman, Krishna is above Brahman. Because if we accept that type of personal and responsive God, the metaphysical absolute, truly, but also not a cold series of principles like electricity, magnetism, or gravity. And certainly in some of the Hindu schools, that really is what they're talking about. God as some sort of divine principle, like electricity and so on, that doesn't respond. I put that very ineloquently, but I'm trying to deal with a lot there for the simple reason, dealing with sort of cold states of activity, cold states of energy without the slightest sort of responsorial activity, whereas Bhagavan does. So yeah, I really think I'm being dragged into what these Pentecostals are talking about. I've been weirdly debating with them all week. Apparently they understand what I'm doing. I wish I had understood what I was doing half the time. But, on a theological level, they keep telling me what you're doing is you're constantly looking for, the common man and the ordinary Joe and the guy struggling to with his blue beans to make five. with debts and with a low-paying job, and you're trying to talk about spirit at work within those particular realms, and I confess that. What strikes me wonderfully about the story of Krishna, of course, Kams is the great Judas character of that particular narrative, who actually is redeemed at the end, despite his war with Krishna. As he is dying, to cut a very long story short, he sees Krishna in his divine form and therefore is saved. The promise that would one day be Christianity is very, very clearly there. Whether that's meant to be taken as anything apart from very sophisticated myth in the classic sense and therefore ahistorical, I'm not sure. I think you'd need a much deeper knowledge of what not only the theologists but the mystics of that part of the world were talking about. Therefore, I suppose I tend to rely a lot more closely on the Christ principle, who is, despite that use of the word, a very reactive and interreactive force. Yeah, I mean, I still don't know whether in Kali Yuga or not, since there are so many people willing to tell me different things. If Steiner says that, I really hope that's true, and that he knew what he was talking about, because what a grim place to be in. And I came across a couple of years ago. I don't know if you've come across them over there, John. The Brahma Kumaris. There was one in Britain called Sister Jayanti, who was a saintly figure. Until you sort of realise they're actually talking about Shiva. That unsettles me, I'm sorry. Yes, the destructive part of divine reality, I'm aware of that, but it still makes me unsettled. They have a meeting house in the north of England over here, which I know people who have been there, and their meditation room has a charged electrical atmosphere. There is great power in that room. And apparently anyone that goes into that space, that worship space, is very aware, excuse me, there's something of a paranormal, if not actually supernatural, range activity is at work. But I don't know, that just makes me, they would say this is the end of Kali Yuga along with Steiner, and everything's winding up and everything's coming to an end before the new age comes and the new incarnation of God comes and teaches us all. I don't know, but it just makes me nervous about, here is Christ and there is Christ at the end of things, and who do we trust and who we don't trust. So we trust Rudolf Steiner, we trust spiritual science, but we got to be careful what other things we trust outside, for me, of a very clear Christian tradition. The minute that is clarified, what we're actually talking about, the Beatitudes and so on, that is safe ground to stand on. The scripture becomes safe ground in a time where an earthquake is beginning to shake us all out of our sleep ever more clearly. I do hope it's the end of Kali Yuga. I do hope the age of Aquarius is coming along, because I think we need to start moving into what comes next, as opposed to, increasing terror of what is now. I'll hand back to you, John.
Well, if you look more deeply at it, you'll see that Rudolf Steiner says the universe is consciousness, okay, and that space and time as they're perceived, that's an illusion, and that really totally confirms what Krishna said to Arjuna in the chariot on the way into the battle of Kurukshetra. And so when you start getting into, you say, well, yeah, but what does that mean? And you see that the consciousness in this chain of evolution that I keep making reference to, you have the warmth manifestation of old Saturn, and then it goes into pralaya, or rest. All right, so that's warmth, and then it comes out of that pralaya, and you have the old sun evolution and the birth of light. That cycle goes into rest, and then it arises again, and then you have the coming forth of old moon, which is the sound ether. So you have warmth, light, and sound, And then earth is the introduction of the life ether, which is actual physical manifestation. But you see, well, what is that gap in between them? And that's that transcendental consciousness. Because you say, well, it's a period of rest. Well, yeah, for that which is below, okay, but above it, what do you have? You have the company of divine spiritual beings, you see? And so we are breathed forth out of the realm of the divine spiritual beings, and then it's breathing back in again. So that's that, again, going back to this precession of the equinox idea of that we're involved in the rhythmic manifestation of that in-breathing and out-breathing, what Blavatsky called the great breath, right? And so you can understand that pralaya has affinity to the transcendental consciousness. And so that in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, it says meditation is the cessation of the modifications of the mind. Oh, okay. That's the mind free of content that's generated by your individual Jiv Atma, as opposed to the great Atma, the Brahman. See, and so say, well, which is higher? Well, we'll just put it like this, because you have, again, like I've said, the Father is the heart, the Son is the throat, and the brow is the Holy Spirit. And so you have angel, archangel, archai, brow, throat, and heart. And so it gets into some deep levels, depending on in what way you're making reference to it. But that's the most accommodating way to approach it, if you're attempting to come to a kind of a meditative presence, and that you can take your consciousness and bring it to the throat and come into the realm of love, which is the logos. That so you go from imagination to the inspiration of the warmth of speech, to intuition, which is the force that moves the blood. That is that impulse that leads all the way back to the impulses of the spirits of movement, and so there's many layers to these things. And as I've said many times, anthroposophy is the most difficult subject you could study. So it doesn't surprise me that there are really no critiques of any depth. I mean, if you're looking at modern astronomy, everybody's all excited. They're talking about things as far as planetary motion and all of that, and the spiroform way in which we follow the sun. And they're not even aware that Rudolf Steiner was talking about that back in 1923, 1924, and that they haven't even got around to come into some of the deeper levels of what he did say there too. And so then you can get into other levels. At other times, I'll get into some other levels that are quite interesting regarding the lunar aspects of it. But at this point, I also want to thank those that have been so generous as to buy us cups of coffee or purchase our books. That's a wonderful thing. I love getting a message in a bottle out there. And of course, this show wouldn't be possible without Tyla and Vadim. And so that's a shout out to them. And also, at this point, so I don't forget, if I can find them here, with my co-host here, Reverend David, the author of The Grammar of Witchcraft, a Shakespearean study, and it's a haunting conceit. Interesting. And the Shakespearean poetry of Caliban's Redemption. This gentleman has a profound grasp of language that's lacking in today's modern world. And his major work is Mount Athos Inside Me, Essays on Religion, Swedenborg and the Arts, edited by the very talented Daniela Irandust. And those are available on Amazon. And I highly recommend them. As for me, this one's a little faded, but this is my first book, The Arcana of the Grail, Angel, the Spiritual Science of the Holy Blood and of the Holy Grail. A study developed out of the work of Rudolf Steiner of the underground streams of esoteric Christianity, which flowed from the Brotherhood of the Holy Grail to the Order of the Knights Templar and the True Rosicrucian Order, which is 640 pages with a great many diagrams and an extensive bibliography. And all those diagrams are reproduced in my second volume, The Arcana of Light on the Path, which is more of a meditative tool. And what I call the Grail diagrams are based upon diagrams that I saw many years ago of Aaron Pfeiffer's. And I added to them extensively and added a great many more diagrams from my own personal research. And so it can be very helpful for anybody who wishes to try and come to a deeper understanding of the works of spiritual science. And they're available on eBay. If you're outside the country, though, you want to contact me directly through the academia website that's listed below, or you can contact me by private message on Facebook. And if you wish to buy us cups of coffee, go to paypal.me/dparry777 or paypal.me/John Barnwell 888. And so there you have that part of the program. And we have plenty of time left. So, yes, I think that in entering into this, when you start understanding these cosmic numbers, you can use them to help decipher many of the temples and cathedrals, and that this sacred number mystery, of which a leading exponent is Pythagoras, who had his mystery center where he taught so many, and he had some of the deepest understanding. And the mysteries of music that ended up becoming expressed in the structure of the cathedrals, that they are actually music in stone, so to speak. But you can go to many of the ancient temples of India, and you can also apply a lot of these coordinates, and you see that there's that same type of mystery is revealed when you go to ancient Egypt, that the temples were oriented towards particular heavenly bodies and cosmic events. Likewise at Stonehenge, it's like a equinoctial clock, and it can show you when it's time to plant, when it's time to introduce the bull into the herd, and all of that. But yet Rudolf Steiner's description of the Druid mysteries, he said that the Druids would look into the shadow of the standing stones of the cromlechs, and that they could look into the ethers, and through the direct perception of the etheric world of life, know that it was time to plant, or it was time to introduce the bull into the herd. So you mustn't think that they were sitting there abstractly calculating from these. It's just the orientation was an acknowledgement. It was a cosmic representation. It's just like he talks about the ancient teachings of Stone Age India, in the old Indian period, just after the sinking of Atlantis. He said these were simple souls in many ways, and when you came to a great teacher, you knew it because you could look at him and see that he was a great teacher. You didn't need to read his 50 books, because there weren't 50 books. He wasn't writing books. And it was an oral tradition that became memorized, and eventually, thousands of years later, became written down. And so truth is much stranger than fiction.
Yeah, I think it gets back to what I was saying a couple of weeks ago. There's a Freudian slip, because I do hope this show goes on for years. Where are the druids when you need them? We need them now. Can you all make a comeback, please? Yeah, I mean, I had the privilege of going to Stonehenge as a schoolboy, when you could actually walk up to the stones and touch them and so on. There's just something about that place, but that's in a country like Britain, where the history just goes back forever. And I know it does everywhere, but there's a feeling of that in certain places here. The ancient mysteries of wood and stone just slam into your face every now and again. And that's certainly, it's clearly some sort of clock. And it's clearly, you don't have to be a mathematician to actually say that, it's clearly a place where you observe the sun as well as the moon. And I seem to remember somebody telling me not too long ago that it was equally an incredible lunar calendar as much as it was a solar one. And what they were trying to do was marry the two mysteries. I don't know, perhaps the schoolboy part of me likes the idea of a group of mathematicians sat staring at each other and trying to calculate when all this happens. But of course, it was much more subtle and a lot more organic and a lot more fun than that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not into the right, let me rephrase that. I was going to say I'm not into the megalithic mysteries of Britain. I mean, I am, but I'm not in the sense of, going and pursuing them. I know some people are. I mean, I've known lots of lay hunters in my day, and I remember reading Alfred Watkins' book on ley lines. I had an antique copy a couple of years ago. I don't know where that went. And actually feeling enlightened by it. The fact that there were terrestrial orientations and pathways and trackways that have been trodden into this country for untold thousands of years. And they all had significance, and they had mythic importance, and they had magical importance. The two are not the same. That actually made me think, what a wonderful place in some ways this island was. Forgive me for using the past tense, but that's beginning to be how it increasingly feels. When it comes to Pythagoras, I suppose I'm more interested in the fact he's supposed to have floated over the temple of Apollo than actually sat trying to rip off the mask of Apollo, which I find irreligious. But there we, as I say, it's a subject that I admire, but I can't say I've achieved any depth in, and probably I'm not going to go out of my way to do so. I mean, I admire the mathematical correspondences with music, because music is one of the great treasures of human life. It's just not something as a field that appeals to me when it's on its Todd. When it comes into music or architecture, then I can understand it. When it comes into earthworks, then I can understand it. I mean, the rollerite stones strike me as much more sinister and potent. And I'd like to go and do some more visiting of them at some point. And of course, no one can actually go without permission into the area of Stonehenge, the lands of Stonehenge now, because it's all fenced off by the government, who are planning yet again to lift up all the stones and put them down again to measure something. And there's rumours of a highway being built. Is nothing sacred in the Britannic lands? The answer is no, it's not. I remember some conspiracy theorist on YouTube. Why is it always YouTube? That had found some old photographs of archaeologists lifting up the stones and putting them down again without the slightest realization, he can't have been British, that happens periodically. And saying, look, you're being lied to. Look, you're being lied to. Look at what's staring at you. So I assume he means that it was all built in the 50s and people were being misled, as opposed to knowing something about the fact they can't bloody leave them alone. Leave them alone, let them do whatever they're doing, and let people enjoy them. I'm not even against the conspiracy people, but, let's get a grip. As I say, John, it's not really my thing, and I admire it. It overspills for me in something like the equinox, the processions of the equinox, maybe. Of course, in Crowleyan terms, what was it? Osiris has now got off the throne. If you're looking at the procession of archetypes, and Horus, what a chilling thought, is now on the throne of the gods. So that, in other words, that's the dominant archetype of this particular aeon, according to that system. I remember reading his Book of the Law and feeling a slight chill. I mean, we're coming up to Halloween. We might as well talk about it. A slight chill when I got to the end and it said, now you're a centre of pestilence. Well, I can't remember the other bit. And yeah, basically, you're part of all this, whether you like it or not. So I'm paraphrasing. What a cheap way of trying to get someone into your worldview and pay their dues. That is cheap, Al. But there we are. And I remember reading some of the descriptions. I mean, some of it is actually fascinating prose poetry. My trouble with Crowley is that the artistic level is up and down. The standard goes up and down continually. If you're not looking at something coherent, which is part of the trouble with his work, which had people look up to him as some sort of messianic figure. I don't really understand that, but some people do. And good. I hope that works for you, and you're being led back to cosmic consciousness and love and wisdom. And I've got my own opinions on that, and I'll leave it there, because I don't want to go down the route of what happened Saturday week ago and start shouting a group of speakers down because they're born again Christians. So I'm not going down that route. For me, it wouldn't work, and there are real reasons why it wouldn't work. And having one view of Crowley and willfully ignoring some of the other stuff actually isn't productive. But there we are. Yeah, I think I'll leave that there. I'm going to end up talking about Crowleyanity, which I don't really want to do. The Aeon of Horus, I was reading some of the descriptions, and how he rends apart his enemies. I did notice one thing. I can't have been the only person. Horus promises the followers of Crowley a war machine. Now, what was that? 1904. That was written in 1904. Wasn't it Captain Fuller who became one of the followers of Aleister Crowley, who actually invented the tank, which, of course, the British... Can I be Dutch? Can I go to Heathrow Airport and burn my passport? And can I be Dutch, please? Horus kept his word because he invented the tank. The British didn't like it, so he sold it to the Germans. Little unsettling things like Horus kept his promise. So this new vehicle of carnage and mayhem comes into the world. Or, other little things like this is the Aeon of the Crown and Conquering Child, and the fact modern society simply doesn't want to grow up. They don't want a mature stance. They seem to want to be teenagers forever. I mean, at the very least, that is incredibly insightful into the body politic and the sort of the group psychology of what was coming next. But at the back of my mind somewhere, there are all these slightly worrisome thoughts that was it more than that. And I'm reminded, of course, of the confrontation between Aleister Crowley and Montague Summers. Montague Summers was, of course, an old Catholic. It's not true that he wasn't a Catholic priest at all. He was an old Catholic. And they had a very difficult time in Britain in those days, as they do now. The great confrontation, was it actually at Dennis Wheatley's house? I can't remember. I do hope so, but I suspect it wasn't. Where you have someone basically living into the archetype of a modern witch, Big Al, and somebody living the profile of a modern witch finder, Father Summers. And apparently were they daggers drawn? No. It was this witty, sparkling conversation that went on for a couple of hours, with Crowley ending up saying, what a learned demonologist, and people need to take his work a lot more seriously. And Monty just, not being on a back foot, you never got him on a back foot, saying, everything this man has written deserves to be studied. So all they did was manage to become, form a mutual glee club in the process. But I can't help thinking, is there more than the paranormal going on at the back of all that? And it's all based, of course, on his calculations of a procession of the equinoxes. So I suppose it's not only my lack of enthusiasm. I suppose, right, pleading guilty to the court. No one could do everything, but also pleading innocent to the court. I mean, as I say, it's not really to my taste. Apart from the fact beautiful things turn up every now and again, like the great Hindu temples, and worrisome things like Crowley's teasing of his readers with things that became true after the fact that are genuinely of a difficult and sort of slightly frightening order. I'll hand back to you, John.
And so you do a little soliloquy about how you don't want to get into Aleister Crowley and then spend 5 minutes talking about it. And so that's kind of the way that is. And that's okay. Actually, I know more about his work than most people that profess to be his followers. And so I can see some of the holes in his argument. And of course, one of the people who was deep into his work was Del Close, who was the founder of Second City in Chicago, one of the founders, and a teacher of so many people from Hollywood that I'm not even going to go down that road. But let's just say Aleister Crowley has the distinction, along with George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, of being the two individuals, the two only individuals that I know of that came to see Rudolf Steiner, and he wasn't open to meeting them. So they're definitely not traveling the same road as him. Not that you couldn't learn something, Rudolf Steiner said about Ahriman, or which would be Satan in common parlance, is that the only defense against Ahriman is understanding the nature of his working so that you can see it for what it is. It's exposing it so that it's not working unconsciously in you. And so the challenge of number is to get caught in the realm of the mechanistic measure, number, and weight. But in working with the apocalyptic numbering is a different thing entirely. And that's, I guess, the distinction I want to make for those of you that have been following me for some time. And that when you get into talking about the seven great mysteries, that's a different thing than measure, number, and weight. And so we have plenty of time left. And just to clarify, you were trying to think of the name of the actress who played Wonder Woman, and Wise Old Man says Linda Carter. Yes, that's one big woman. I don't know what happened to her, but yeah. In fact, I never even saw the movie, but I just been so big on ignoring so much of mass culture for the most of my life. But although I have been enjoying Downton Abbey again, and that's pretty funny. But there's some things in there that lets me know that the gentleman that wrote that has done his homework. He's an educated man, just from the references that he makes and the turns of phrase. And I fully admit that British actors and actresses are superior to American actors and actresses in almost every case. Of course, it makes sense that they were actually trained. But of course, my favorite of the British is Gary Oldman. And my favorite performance by him is Immortal Beloved, where he plays Ludwig van Beethoven. But yes, I love period dramas too. Durow, that's and Doughton, yeah, Agatha, yeah. that's what we tend to seek out, is these period dramas, BBC stuff, and Jane Austen and all of that. Fascinating stuff, and based upon actual works of literature instead of like kind of script writers that are worn out from too much coffee and too much booze, like what they tend to come up with here in the US of A as of late. I think that there's so much that has come out that isn't worth watching. I mean, I try, because I've over the last few years, that as I get out of my dotage, now I'm watching the Idiot Box that I've ignored for most of my life, although I still don't watch any network television other than I might get 2 or 3 minutes of Fox at a time, until that I stub my toe on the fact that they won't even go deeply into a subject. And they're supposed to be the ones that are leading the charge. So good luck with that. I think that I don't know. I think that when you start looking at these things more closely, I mean, really, is Barbara Bush, is she the offspring of Aleister Crowley? She looks like him. I'll tell you that right now, and that would make George Bush Jr. The magical child, which is like, well, he's a hawk. Yeah, the hawk. What are those? Neocons, So Crowley was predicting the neocons, and also the neoliberals. All these people, this war culture that everybody would like to get out from under. But yes, she looks just like Aleister Crowley, and supposedly her mother was in Paris playing around, and Crowley was at large at that time, and they had a fling, and she got pregnant, and that was George Bush Sr. or Jr. I mean, the oldest child, the one that looks like Alfred E. Newman. But in any regard, who knows? And in fact, I don't even care. They're no longer they're very relevant, although they played a key role in modern history. I mean, people forget that George Bush Sr., that he worked in the embassy in China, right? That he was the ambassador to China. And with everything going on now with China, it's like, that's kind of telling. Trump looks like General Patton. Yeah, well, that's possible too, These days, I don't know. There's so much of that stuff that you could spend a lot of time trying to figure out, and you're not going to figure it out. It's just not, you don't have enough information at hand to be able to actually prove it. So I don't bother with a lot of that stuff. But that's funny. As far as General Patton, a friend of mine from my days in marketing nutrition was the guy driving the truck that Patton got killed in. And they got T-boned coming through an intersection. And General Patton died. And he thought he was a reincarnation of Hannibal, who led the charge into Italy with elephants in his army, right? The army from Carthage, the Carthaginians. Yes, history is fascinating. And I don't want to belabor the point, but we're moving along, and I don't want to overburden people with concepts. I'm going to reapproach some of the subject matter I touched upon today from other vantage points, because in spiritual science we don't give definitions so much as it's about approaching a subject from a different viewpoint, and in both space and in time, because things change, and that things have to be recast to be able to meet the demands of whatever stage of consciousness is unfolding. And so if somebody likes to think that we're in the age of Aquarius, well, actually, this is the age of the consciousness soul. So if you're manifesting the spirit self, right, the manas principle, it's in terms of your consciousness, yeah, you are in the age of Aquarius. That's true. You could be in the age of Aquarius. It doesn't mean everybody else is. But yeah, the universe is consciousness. And so if David would like to lead us in his assessment and consecrate our strivings with a prayer, that'd be greatly appreciated.
Gosh, I don't know about assessments. Certainly the concept of as above, so below, I think is frightfully important. The fact that we live in a living organism, the cosmos is a living organism, and we are it and it is us. I think that, of course, that's behind a lot of these sacred equations. That certainly needs to be explored from every angle possible. As I say, it's just that particular way wasn't mine, but I can understand very clearly the significance of it. I think there's a certain caricature going around at the minute that religious people, whatever that means, simply don't get on with scientific people, whatever that means. And it seems to be, at the risk of revealing my ignorance, coming to a head in modern America, where I've read some absolutely unbelievably insensitive and ignorant exchanges on both sides. There was something, I can't remember the magazine, it was something relatively august, asking recently in a header, can you be scientific and spiritual, which shows the guy who wrote it understood very little of both of those topics. It's time to grow up a little. And if you think, most of the great minds of the human race who have delivered scientific principles and explicated them have been religious, it really is time to have a broader view of all of that. As I say, I hope that's not excusing my apathy is the wrong word, my lack of engagement with this particular route, but I confess there is a complete lack of engagement with it, since it's not me, it's not what I do. But that said, the idea of living realities, layers of living plasma on every level, I don't know, I think that's just astonishing. It's curiously is ideas like that getting to me into examining Unity Church at the minute. That's a different one, which has a very bad press, even though it seems to have completely enlightening principles behind it. So that's something I'm exploring at the minute. In terms of prayer, my friends, were at the end of yet another show, and it's thanks to John and our backers that we're all here this afternoon. But let's remember, I suppose, in all these wonderful arguments, these are abstract and abstruse moments which are necessary and increasingly frowned upon in our society, particularly maybe for the common man, which depresses me and worries me endlessly. It's almost as though knowledge now is for an elite or the growing elites or a privileged few, which has never been the case, unfortunately never will be. Let's all remember that we're called to be thinking beings, even in our fallen estates. We're called to knowledge nearly as much as we're called to faith, maybe as much. So let's enjoy every book, every paradigm, every moment of understanding we can glean in our lives, in our minds and in our souls in the days until we meet again next week. And may Christ bless all of those endeavors in each one of us. Amen.
Amen. Well, I can't thank you enough, my friend. I'm thinking to see if there's anything I forgot to do. Well, I want to thank all our friends who continually show up and put up with our unending exploration into what is truth.